Chapter 20.
World War II. The Normandy beaches are remembered for the World War II invasion of the Allied forces on June 6, 1944, a day known throughout the world as D-Day. On that day, the American forces landed on Utah and Omaha beaches and began their assault on the Germans who occupied villages in the French Beach area and the hilltop position at Pontahawk above Omaha Beach. The British forces also made landings that day on the Normandy beaches designated as Sword, Juno, and Gold. The landings were the beginning of the end of the Second World War, but victory was not in the soldiers' immediate sight. Before the scent of victory was assured, the enemy had to be conquered and their ranks broken. As part of the infantry divisions that waded onto Omaha Beach on D-Day, and in the days after D-Day, was a group of soldiers assigned to regiments to send coded messages from the front lines to division headquarters. These were the code talkers of the American Army. The code talkers, as they were called, had at the front lines other code talkers at division headquarters to decipher their messages from the front, and they were all volunteers. The soldiers sending the coded messages were Comanche Indians who used their native language to report on troop and enemy movements in France after the D-Day landings. They were unique because there were only 17 of them, and all 17 of the Comanches had completed training at Fort Benning, Georgia, to serve in their country's armed forces and transmit what was hopefully an unbreakable code. As code talkers, they were excellent. They could send written or spoken, and their goal was to help win the war for the Allies and to confuse the enemy as they were saving lives and winning the war. The Germans never figured out the code and often referred to the message makers as crazy Americans. The code talkers directed aircraft to targets, and they relayed information about the situation on the ground. And although some of the code talkers were wounded and a few seriously, they all survived the war and returned to their homes in Oklahoma. The Comanche language is somewhat different because although written, it is a phonetic language in which correct pronunciation depended upon understanding the phonetics involved. Some of the military words, such as tank, were not part of the Comanche language, so other easily recognized words were used. The word turtle substituted for the word tank because both had hard outer shells. Machine guns became sewing machines because of the noise they both made. The way the Comanches spoke could not be translated, and as a result, they provided an invaluable service to their country. And in the Pacific Theater, the Navajo Indians were making the same contribution to the U.S. forces. These soldiers, too, were called code talkers, and they, too, communicated between the front lines and headquarters by telephone, radio, and telegraph. But they used their native Navajo language to send unreadable and undecipherable message to military headquarters. The use of code talkers had its beginnings in World War I, when the Americans used Choctaw Indians during the Battle of Meuse-Argonne in France in 1918. But none of the volunteers in either war were recognized or honored for their contributions in the war effort until several years after the end of the Second World War. And it was not the Americans who paid tribute to these volunteers first. It was the French who in 1989 honored the survivors by presenting them with an Order of Merit, which is the second highest honor for valor that the French bestow. 10 years later, the United States Department of Defense recognized the sole surviving Comanche code talker for his bravery and achievements in a ceremony in Washington, D.C. They presented him with an award created a few years before by the Intelligence Corps to recognize contributions such as the Comanches had made. The Comanche volunteers made an additional contribution to society as a whole by their wartime efforts. These men, all of whom had attended school in America and had been chastised for trying to retain their native languages and criticized when they did not speak English, can be credited not only with helping to win the war, but also with ensuring the preservation of a language, which until after the war had been nearly destroyed by its non-use.